Okay, in this video, we're going to take a look at my favorite top 4 ways of using graphic organizers at the beginning of a lesson. And so what we're going to do is sort of a Dave Letterman countdown. And we're going to start with number 4 and then work our way down to number 1. So in terms of the top 4, number 4 would be using graphic organizers at the beginning of a lesson to assess students' background knowledge. And so, for example, here's one, and you've probably seen some similar to this, where you're using your basic KWL technique. What do you know? What do you wonder about? And what did you learn? And you're using that via a graphic organizer to assess students' background knowledge. And these are pretty good, but actually there are much better ways of using graphic organizers than KWL. Now, I know that sounds sacrilegious to some of you, but consider this. One of the ways of using these that will probably give you a lot more payoff is to find out what students know about very specific learning objectives related to your lesson. So for an example, we'll do something on frogs, and we're going to have students share what they know about frogs in terms of what's their best guess. And so for example, how do frogs reproduce? Why are frogs helpful to people? Or why are some frogs dangerous? Those reflect the key learning objectives of my lesson, and now I can find out what they really know about what I'm really teaching. And so a way of using this technique is to have students huddle either in pairs or small groups and discuss each of these topics and note some key ideas and then share it with the class or share it with another group. Personally, I like having each group share at least one idea that they noted on their graphic, and then sort of rotate from group to group until we've had a chance to kind of go through what everybody came up with. What's really important, though, is when you're assessing students' background knowledge or activating their background knowledge, you want to impose really strict time limits, because if you're not careful, an activity like this can eat up a lot of instructional time. So it's a good thing to do, but you don't want to spend half your class period doing it. So for an example, if you're giving students a graphic like this, give them a limited amount of time. So for example, you've got 3 minutes to list key information you know about each of these topics. Ready, set, go. And so students have a sense of urgency about getting the information out, and they're not dawdling and they're not discussing other stuff. They tend to be much more focused. Now, this is an example of a high student engagement kind of instructional activity, because students are going to be really into it and that sort of thing. Likewise, as students are sharing the information they noticed that they noted on the graphics during this activity, you want to have strict time limits on that as well. Again, you don't want to eat too much class time up doing this, but it is a very powerful thing to do. So that's number 4. Now let's take a look at number 3. And that is to use graphic organizers to pre-teach new vocabulary that students are going to be encountered in the upcoming lesson, whether it's science or social studies lesson or math or whatever. And so this is just an example of one of the many vocabulary smart sheets that are on the Make Sense toolkit. Here's a way of using this. What we'd have students do is meet with peers, either with a partner or with small groups, and interview each other, in other words, to get their best guess of what this term is about. So let's say the word is perennial, and so what they're doing is they're interviewing different peers to find out what they think the term means, and then they list their best guess of the definition. And then that's followed by the teacher then providing the actual correct definitions of the term. And we need to make sure they're in student-friendly language, meaning we're not using terms that need defining in the definition of the new term, and so forth. Now, another way of doing this is using a graphic, and it's almost the reverse. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to start by the teacher defining the terms for students and using, again, student-friendly definitions, followed by some interactive guided note-taking. And so basically the way it works is we have the term, the teacher defines it, guides the note-taking on that, and then cues students and guides as they draw pictures or they formulate knowledge connections and that sort of thing. but you're beginning with the correct definition, and you're having students then deal with those definitions in different ways. My number 2 option of the top 4 for beginning a lesson is reviewing prior learning. Now, graphic organizers are really great devices for doing this. And so one of the ways you can do this is bring up a graphic that you used in a previous lesson that addresses really critical information that the current lesson is going to be based on, and have students simply use the graphic and practice explaining the ideas that have been noted on the completed graphic organizer. And so I might give them one that we completed, for an example, in the previous lesson, and then they simply use it and practice explaining what the ideas are that are noted on the graphic. Another way you can do this is have them just explain the details. And so I might give them a graphic and there might be detailed prompts for each of the things, but not a lot of the specifics. And what they have to do, so for an example, when they're talking about a sudden catastrophic impact, and the first prompt is strip mining, well, they have to explain why strip mining would be an example of sudden catastrophic impact in terms of the human negative impact on the ecosystem. And then they go on to explain how construction does that and how war does that and so forth. So the prompts are there, but not the specifics. Another way of doing this is not providing any of the details, but just the main ideas, and then have students try to remember what the details are. And finally, another option is what I call blanks for keywords, whereas they use a previously completed graphic, but they have to try to figure out what are the keywords that go in those blanks. Of those 4, I really like the one where I'm giving partially completed graphic organizers where there's some information about the details, but not all of it, and students then use that to review and explain to their peers what that was about. Well, here's my number 1. And so, ta-da! My top pick for using graphic organizers at the beginning of a lesson is to provide an advanced organizer. And this turns out to be a really simple thing to do, but really powerful. And so basically what you do is you show the graphic organizer that you're going to be using in the upcoming lesson with the main ideas already noted. Then I'm going to explain how the information that we're going to be learning about is going to be organized on the graphic organizer. So we basically explain how the graphic organizer is going to work. Then we identify the learning objectives and finally reveal the sequence of the lesson phases. Now, when you look at all 4 of these techniques, your order might be a different one than my 4, 3, 2, 1. These are just my preferences. Now, in the real world, you won't have time to do all 4 of these techniques because each one of these takes a chunk of time. This is one of the quickest, and one of the reasons why I pick it as number 1 is because it takes very little time to do, but what the research shows is that this really makes a huge difference in how well students remember the information that you're going to be teaching. Each of these are really critical too, but again, you're probably not going to have time to do them all. And so I would always do this and then pick maybe one or another one depending on the lesson, and kind of mix this up. So in the next video, we're going to take a look at instructional routines to use during instruction, and specifically when you're doing in-class reading.